look through the Mercedes AMG back catalogue and you'll find all sorts of awesome cars, things like the AMG Hammer, the CLK DTM, but it was really in 2008 with the C63 that they took a giant leap forward. And that's because that was the first AMG that was designed and engineered specially to be an AMG from the off. So before then, really, it was a bunch of guys in a Falterback getting a Mercedes, stuffing a big V8 engine usually under the bonnet and then sending it off on its way. So the C63 really stepped up, in terms of handled really well, but it still felt like an old school AMG, and that it was, it could be a bit of a hooligan if you wanted to. And it also had that V8 engine, which was just epic. And when they introduced the Estate, it brought something genuinely new to the market that neither the BMW M3 or Audi RS4 could quite match. I thought the first one, was absolutely brilliant. The second one was best in class versus that M3 and the Audi, and now there's a new one. And we're here in Germany to test it against those long-standing rivals. So the BMW M3 Touring, which is now available as an Estate, of course, and also the Audi RS4 Competition, which is only available as an Estate. They're all pretty expensive these days though, £85,000 or so each for the BMW and Audi, and more like £90,000 for the Mercedes. The thing is though, while those rivals stick with a pretty formulaic recipe, the Mercedes doesn't, and there's a clue in the name. It's called the Mercedes AMG C63S, which is so far so familiar, and to that they add a new suffix called E-Performance, and that's a big hint that this car isn't just a little bit different, it is completely different. Instead of the old 4-litre V8 engine, Mercedes has slashed cylinder count and displacement in half. So we've got a 4-cylinder 2-litre engine with an electrically assisted turbo, a bit like the ones they use in Formula 1. That makes 476 brake horsepower on its own. And that doesn't just make it more powerful than the RS4, it makes it the most powerful 4-cylinder production engine in the world. It's still hand-assembled at a Falterback like the old days, and it's mounted longitudinally, not transversely, like a hot hatch. There's also a 6.1 kilowatt-hour battery and an electric motor that drives the rear axle through a 2-speed gearbox, and that adds 201 brake horsepower. Electric power can also drive the front axle when the fully variable all-wheel drive senses slip, and there's also rear-wheel steering, 9 speeds, 8 driving modes, 4 recuperation modes, and, of course these days, a drift mode. It is massively complex, but on paper, it's also pretty compelling. There are outputs of 670 brake horsepower and 752 pound-foot of torque that represent easy triple-digit gains over the old C63 and huge gains over the two rivals we've assembled today, though that peak does drop by 94 brake horsepower after a 10-second boost. The new plug-in hybrid C63 also promises massively improved MPG and CO2 figures of 40 mpg and 156 grams per kilometre, as well as around 8 miles in pure electric mode. But really, this is a performance plug-in hybrid with a battery designed for fast power delivery and draw. There are two big problems with that. There's no V8 noise and also weight, because this car weighs 2,115 kilos as an Estate, and partly that's because there's a big battery in the boot, 89 kilos of battery, which also makes the boot a lot smaller, unfortunately. So 2,115 kilos, the M3 weighs 1,865, the Audi 1,729 kilos. So this is literally hundreds of kilos heavier than the opposition. So talking about that noise, let's see what this car sounds like when we turn it on, should we? So brake, engine, start, stop. That's it. That's all you get. As soon as you start it up, there's no engine, there's no noise. It's a 6.1 kilowatt hour battery. You get 8 miles, about 13 kilometers on zero emissions mode. So you have to turn it from comfort to sport to wake. The new 4-cylinder engine, so it has a little bit of a purposeful sort of raughtiness to it, but I think you have to remember just how amazing that old V8 sounded, and first impressions, it is a little bit of a disappointment. But let's go out on the road and see how this feels. I think one thing to say with this car straight away is there are an awful lot of drive modes to get through, and it is pretty confusing using these very, very cheap feeling controls down here to scroll through them all and decide what you want. Now, you can do an individual mode on here, but I find myself setting that and then actually change my mind. I think, well, I want to drive more slowly now, I want to drive faster. And because it's just one mode, I then find myself messing around with this little wheel on the left, and it's not very intuitive. I just end up getting in a little bit of a mess and not feeling like I'm connecting with this car properly, unfortunately. So we've got the suspension, we've got the AMG dynamics. I need to put it in manual as well on the gear shifts. I much prefer just having a lever to knock over there, but this is on a column. Suspension stiffness. I have this AMG dynamics thing that I really need to put in Master or Pro, I think. And yeah, it's just that level of mess before you start, really. And so yeah, I'm not keen on this interface. The seating position, I think it's pretty good. It's quite low down. It's not very, very low down. There's a lot of lateral support, or a decent amount of lateral support, I'd say, in these seats. They could go lower and they could be more comfortable. They're not particularly comfortable seats, and I wouldn't relish a long journey in these seats, much as they look cool and they do offer that support around your sides. The other thing you notice very quickly in this car is the brake pedal. It is very, very poorly defined in about that much of the top travel. And with a performance car, you want a very clean bike, just like you do with a steering or throttle response, anything like that. You want to feel like it's a sort of precision driving tool. And this just has a load of mush, presumably because of the regen they're trying to do with the hybrid system, but just doesn't instill any sort of sense of connection or confidence with this car. Steering as well, I have to say I am not massively fond of this steering, so it's not got masses of feel to it, but I think it's really the response that bothers me. It's clearly some sort of variable rate that's working with the rear wheel steering, and I just find it, again, it's that sense of interaction and keying into this car. I just find it just not sure quite what it's up to, and it's a sort of slightly unfortunate springiness to it. It is precise, but I'm just not really connecting with this car as I get into it. It's sort of thwarting me a little bit. Now, I'm in sport mode at the moment. The engine's very, very subdued in the background. I can actually wind down again, go complete electric mode, turn off, or I can dial up to Sport Plus. Let's try Sport Plus. Now, in terms of the ride on this car as well, I'm in Sport Plus now, and it's suddenly started to get quite jiggy, which you'd expect anyway. So if I take it down to comfort, I think, you know, we're in Germany here, we're going over a few kind of little speed bump things. It feels, I would say, acceptable here. There are a few sort of little bits of sort of secondary patter coming through, and my suspicion is that while it feels all right here, I don't think this car is going to ride very well in the UK. We'll have to wait to find that out, but here in Germany, it's okay in comfort. But yeah, let's see in the UK. So if I slow down to third gear here, this crazy display here as well, 2,000 RPM. 2,000 RPM, floor it, so instant throttle response, it's moving straight away. Now, I don't know if you could see that in me moving around. So you got the gear change, but then there was like a flat spot after that gear change. So it had this kind of real fury and energy to it that really picked it up to start off with. After that gear change that came in relatively promptly, there was then just a complete hole in the power delivery. And Mercedes does say after 10 seconds you lose that kick, but it feels, I've had that a few times now, and it feels like more than 100 brake horsepower, but it feels a really, really significant chunk of that 670 brake horsepower. Again, it's just gone flat. I don't know if there's something wrong with this particular car, or is this how they all are, but it is a very curious, you know, loads of power, just, it was fine then, and then it'll cut out. So there's something about the integration of this powertrain, and I know it is fiendishly tricky stuff, so I don't envy the engineers who had to do this, but there's something that's not right here. And then, you know, when I use the torque and haul it out of that corner there, it is a very rapid, stable and competent car. So, you know, you can feel the rear wheel steering working through there, handling, the grip. You know, it is not a complete lost cause, but I think the powertrain leaves a hell of a lot to be desired. going downhill relatively quickly. Now that brake pedal is just pure mush, but the steering, very pointy, it's a bit numb, a bit springy, but it is quick and it is very agile through here. I feel very confident to toss it around and take liberties with it. So it is a decent chassis, I think. It doesn't feel, I would never ever guess that this car weighed well over 2 tons, no way. It does, you know, this car's 10 millimeters longer in terms of wheelbase. It doesn't feel like a longer, heavier car. It is, of course, if you put it round a track versus the old one, it would presumably absolutely destroy it. The problem is just that connection with the car, that enjoyment. It's just a bit of a synthetic, sterile car, and the fact that it's not as well integrated, or it really doesn't feel finished. If this is how they all feel, this doesn't feel, it isn't finished. And that engine note, you know, when it's really roaring like that, it's clearly artificially augmented. It does kind of, you know, get your adrenaline going, but it is not an authentic engine note. It's digitally enhanced to create the emotion. It is frustrating, this car. I think, you know, it's a bold move for them to go and do something like this, and they've done it and they've produced it, but I think it is a bridge too far.
If all this hybrid stuff is a bit much, you could try the BMW M3 Touring. It's changed dramatically as well for its 6th generation, because we'd never had an estate before, never an all-wheel drive version, and never an 8-speed automatic gearbox. But this is a much more familiar recipe than the Mercedes, notably because of the 3-litre twin-turbo straight 6, and because it can still go fully rear-wheel drive if you fancy. There isn't even mild hybrid assistance, and it makes 503 brake horsepower and 479 pound-foot of torque. That's quite a weight off the AMG's 670 brake horsepower, but take power to weight into account, and its 270 brake horsepower per tonne plays 317 for the Mercedes, and that's presuming the Mercedes has the full hybrid boost available. Fuel economy is way down at an official 28 mpg, but the M3 has got a much bigger boot than the Mercedes, with 500 litres rising to 1510 litres when you fold down the seats. The Mercedes has only 324 litres because of all those hybrid bits, and seeing as these cars are estates, where carrying stuff is a big part of the point, that's a huge deal.
So on the road in the M3 then, well, straight away I feel really comfortable in this car. The seating position is very, very low down, definitely lower than the Mercedes, so right on the floor. These seats are the optional carbon back seats, of course, and you know, they're a bit of a pain to get into, but they do hold you very, very well. They are quite firm as well. They're not as firm as the Mercedes, so I feel happier to spend a longer trip in this car, and also the lateral support you get is very, very welcome. Now, like the Mercedes, there are all sorts of driving modes to set up here, but I do find them a lot easier to configure. You can do the M1 and M2 buttons as well. So basically I have an M1 button for all my kind of hooligan type of stuff, or sort of, you know, racier driving, and M2 would be for kind of daily driving, sort of mooching around. But, you know, it's just so welcome to get in a car with a proper engine. This straight 6 is, you know, when they first did this engine and made it a twin turbo, you know, when the engine, the last generation M3 went turbo, it wasn't the best. I didn't like the way it kind of behaved in that, but they've absolutely nailed it with this one. Really good throttle response. It builds much more progressively, and it's really, really fast as well. Sounds good. It's still got that slightly kind of diesel edge that the other one had, but it's got much more of the old M feeling as well, in terms of the way it builds, and its exhaust note is just a lot more engaging. Steering I find much more kind of faithful and precise than the Mercedes. It's not massively feelsome, but it is very, very consistent, and like with the brakes got a nice clean feel, nice clean response from the steering as well. So very quickly I start to feel like I'm kind of connecting with this car and interacting with it. a decent amount of grip in two-wheel drive mode, but once you get past that, you'll happily light them up, and actually it's very, very stable and predictable. Just hold out of that corner. You know, four-wheel drive is very welcome. I think it's a really kind of neat trick they've done, but I think this car can cope a lot better than people think just in the rear-wheel drive setting. I just love the way it goes up to really encourages you to rev it out now. It used to be a bit of a torque plateau and you used to short shift in the old one, but this really encourages you to wind this car out and make the most of all that headroom it's got. Very, very confidence-inspiring handling as well, the way it just flicks through all the corners. I could just jump in this car and drive it in all weathers and drive it quickly and feel really sort of safe, but also really, really engaged in the process of driving this car, which in a way, you know, the Mercedes was technically impressive in some ways, frustrating in others, and also just a bit too sterile for me. Gear shifts as well, we haven't got a dual clutch gearbox here, it's a regular torque converter, but they are plenty punchy enough, I would say. They're nice and quick, and you know, I love those little thunderclaps you get when you change gear as well. I think the other thing about this car as well is the way it rides. I think out here in Germany, where we're comparing it with the Mercedes and the Audi, I think it definitely rides better than the Mercedes. It's more settled. It is an inherently firm car, but it is also a comfortable car. I'll let you get a sense of this car's flexibility. So if I get it down to just over 1,000 RPM, third gear, it's pulling already, but not. So about 2.5, 2.6, it starts to really kind of pick up its heels and goes. So there is just that bit at the bottom of this rev range where it just needs to kind of clear its throat a bit, get those turbos lit, like there, and then it goes. So you have to drive around that a bit, but it's still pulling, it's still flexible, and the throttle response is really, really sharp and really impressive on this. For a turbo engine, it's very, very crisp, and it's very, very crisp, full stop. I think I was so pleased when this car came out because, you know, I'd sort of fallen out with the previous M3. I just didn't click with this engine when it first came out. And I think with this car, they've just integrated it so much better. It's just everything kind of hangs together really nicely, and really interestingly, you know, when you're comparing it against the Mercedes, that's one thing that car doesn't have. It just lacks that last, not even the last bit of integration. I think it's still quite a long way to go. This car has a really kind of strong sort of homogeneous feel, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it just, the way it hangs together is very, very satisfying. And yet, even though it's way down on power versus the AMG, it doesn't really feel it. I mean, I think when the AMG goes full absolutely bonkers, you feel it, but it doesn't always do that for very long. This is much more consistent, and you know, it's just always there. Kicked out there a bit. I think more than anything, you know, it's just so nice to have a car that has evolved and that's retained so much of what M is about. With a 3-litre engine, the straight six, it's just part of that identity, and I think, you know, they've hung on to it. AMG have let their identity go, and that's what's really cost them in this test, I think. Undoubtedly it has.
All of which brings us to the Audi RS4. It might be at the end of its life cycle, but Audi has given it a little boost to get it across the finish line in the form of a 75-unit special edition, named the Competition. The powertrain is largely the same, meaning a 2.9-litre twin-turbo V6 with an 8-speed auto and 444 brake horsepower and 443 pound-foot of torque. That is a way off the opposition, though the shifts have been recalibrated for a little extra punch. And you get the RS Sports Exhaust Plus for a fruitier sort of noise compared with the rather restrained standard model. There's also a reduction in sound insulation at the front bulkhead, adding a bit more noise and saving 8 kilos. You get fixed rather than variable rate steering, spanner adjustable coilover suspension, a retuned rear differential, and 20-inch alloy wheels wrapped in stickier P0 Corsa tyres, all of which is designed to make this a sharper, more engaging kind of RS4 to drive. And with 495 litres of boot space, rising to 1495 with the seats folded, the Audi has just a little less boot space than the M3.
Now I'll admit that when we first started stacking up this test, I'd mentally placed the Audi RS4 at the bottom of our list, the end of our podium, because it's the oldest car and it's got no more extra power. It's a way off with 444 brake horsepower, but I'll tell you what, this is a really, really good car. Now it gets the basics right with a really nice low set seating position, just like the old one did. This one's got the microfiber kind of Alcantara centers, which add some tactility. You also get this on the steering, and that's the thing that really kind of stands out when you first start driving this car. This new fixed ratio has a very, very natural feel, and it keys you into this car straight away. Now the other thing, as well as the steering with its fixed ratio, are the P0 Corsa tyres. I think they add extra tactility as well and some precision. So as you turn, it bites. It's very, very natural. It's not aggressive, but it's just got a very, very pleasing turn in and a very natural, organic sort of feel to it. So we haven't got any extra power, as I said, but we have got this Audi RS Sports exhaust system, and the regular car is pretty subdued, but this one, it's not shouty, but it just gives it a fuller voice. It's a much richer sound, and versus the Mercedes especially, it's a really nice kind of richer, more involving exhaust note. We've also got a recalibrated shift strategy for the 8-speed auto gearbox, and you really feel that actually there is a punchiness to that. So it's another thing that's just tying in, making this car feel more connected and immediate. This car's got the carbon ceramic brake upgrade as well, so it's got a really nice pedal, especially versus the Mercedes. Very, very prompt, very, very confidence inspiring. Now you do have a few settings that you can choose from on a rather fiddly interface down here, but you can also group them. Two different modes on the RS1 and RS2 settings there, but one thing you can't change is the suspension this time, and that's because this is on adjustable coilover suspension. You actually have to get the spanners out to adjust that. Now you can make a right old mess of that if you go at it yourself, but presumably this one's come with the default factory settings, 10mm lower for the road, and the way it's riding now, far from being kind of edgy and kind of gnarly, it's got a real sort of flow to it on these German roads, and it feels compliant, and I can imagine it actually working really well in the UK as well. And you couldn't say that about the previous RS4. It just had a bit of an edge to it that I wanted knocked off, really. I think it's easy to lose context these days, isn't it, with power outputs, and something like this Audi with 444 brake horsepower. They haven't even increased it versus the standard car, which has been out a while. But also, put it into context. Let's just drop this down into third gear now, and I've got, oh my god, we're just down to about 2,000 RPM. So let's floor it now. Kicks in just after that point, pulls really strongly all the way up to 6,000. So really encouraging me to wind it out. This is a really quick car still. Absolutely flying, really compliant suspension, really engaging exhaust note. So even though on paper it's down a lot and it is the slowest car here, this is still a very, very fast car, and it's more than enough for the road. This car's also got a really, really capable chassis, so even though you've got a relatively modest amount of power, it can really use it. And you've got the P0 Corsas, more tactile, more grippy, and you can really sort of chuck this car around and enjoy it. It's not going to throw any crazy shapes like the M3, but it just hooks into a corner, powers out, and there is real enjoyment of just going point to point quickly in this car in a really sure-footed, confidence-inspiring sort of way. There's no question I'd take this car over the Mercedes, and I think there's a real case for it versus the M3 as well, as a comfortable daily that can still go point to point and entertain and is more subtle. I think it makes a lot of sense, this car. I really like the sound of this engine as well. It's got this sort of mournful V6 sound as you're on part throttle, and then when you push harder, it's sort of a fruitier noise. You've got the sort of thunderclaps, but it's not overplayed. It's just enough, really. I think what's interesting, versus the Mercedes for me is just the wrong concept for that car. They should never have put a 2-litre hybrid in it. With this car, with the RS4, I think it was a 90% car before. It was good, but it wasn't wasn't quite perfect. And with this, with a competition pack, it's lots of small things, but they all work together to just give it that extra bit of fairy dust. It all hangs together and makes it a much more satisfying car to drive, and with an appeal that really quite sort of sneaks up on you as well. This engine's got a really flexible mid-range as well that adds to that sort of daily driving usability. There is a little bit of shunt in it if you load it up on boost and back off, but otherwise it's a very, very strong engine. Now, if I had to concisely sum up these cars, I'd say we've got a winner, a disappointment and a surprise, and the Mercedes is a disappointment and the loser in this test. You know, when some cars come out, they just need a good polish to unlock their greatness, but in this case I just think this hybrid petrol electric concept is just the wrong thing for this car. It's like, you know, it shouldn't be 4 cylinders, it should be 4 litres, like some sort of catastrophic typo from the engineering department, or Metallica swapping guitars for synthesizers. I just want that V8 back. To be fair, when it all hooks up, it's the fastest car here. It's really furious performance, but the integration is the problem, the way there's sort of lumps and bumps and inconsistencies, and there's just too much stuff to configure here. There's also a load of compromises when you get to packaging. So there's a big hump in the boot that eats into boot space of the estate that you bought to put luggage in, and you know, it's just not good enough, this car. For me, I'd say the winner is the BMW M3. I just love the way it blends everything. It's a really rounded car, so it's great to drive quickly, but it does the daily stuff as well. It's great in terrible weather. It's got the biggest boot, and actually I should mention it got the best MPG on this test, 19.9 MPG in some pretty hard use. The Mercedes got 19.1. We didn't use electric mode, so it would have been higher, but we did hundreds of miles, only 8 miles, so 19.9. Audi, by the way, 18.8. But yeah, the stretch of this car's abilities, the way it's safe and secure, it's exciting, then you can turn everything off, and it's just a complete hooligan. This would definitely be my choice. So the surprise of this test is the Audi RS4. It's the oldest car on test. It's only got 444 brake horsepower, but it's absolutely brilliant. You know, I talked before about polishing a car to bring out its best, and that's exactly what's happened here with the competition. It's only a few choice upgrades, but they really are choice upgrades that makes it more tactile, sharper, and just more enjoyable to drive. So first place for me with the BMW M3 Touring, but a definitely highly commended second place for the RS4.